We are seeing the global rise of something I've called 1776 worldwide. Lord Monckton's talked about a truly democratic global alliance of nations through national sovereignty, mutual respect, shared values, promoting the Renaissance on a planetary scale. True liberalism, writ large. No one can compete with it. It's what created the science, the technology, everything we've got. And it pretty much came from right where he's sitting in the British Isles. There were competing systems, though, that didn't want to have this renaissance and all these choices and all this freedom. As John D. Rockefeller I said, competition's a sin. We got to shut this down. We can't let this American system continue. But really, it wasn't the American system. As Winston Churchill wrote in the history of the English-speaking peoples, it was what had already been born in England and in Europe, continuing on. So now Le Pen is in the lead in polls over in France. Nationalism's exploding. You've got Catalonia pulling out of Spain. You've got the UK and Brexit. And people say, oh, well, they're denying it. They're fighting it. Of course, they're tyrants. It's unelected. But it's the animating contest. And now we're listing the facts that it's unelected and that it's arrogantly saying we're going to have a hard cut with the UK to try to terrorize it into submitting. Did it work when Hitler directed his bombs on civilian targets thinking they would capitulate? These tyrants have some real blind spots. I think this is great. Try to hurt the UK. Try to hurt England. And even folks that are in a mind-numbed trance are going to wake up. These elites think bullying us and calling us racist and spewing all this crap is going to make us shut up. It makes us get more vocal. So he joins us to break this down, the huge climate garbage. Mark Moreno is over there in the middle of the Mediterranean in Morocco. And the UN police robbed him of his paperwork and threw him out in the desert. It's just Obama's running around saying, shut down fake news. They're saying arrest Lord Monckton. The 15 attorney generals have been meeting to cook this up. They're going to authoritarianism. The good news is, what are they going to do with President Trump? And again, as soon as they try to fight him, Nigel Farage told me months ago at dinner in Cleveland, he said, listen, don't worry. I'm giving them a chance if they do the right thing and don't try to screw over the will of the British people. I want to spend time with my family. I want nothing more, Alex, to not, to be able to, after 20-something years, to stop this, okay? I'm a free market guy. I'm sick of it. But don't worry. They're going to screw us over, so I'll be back. He said that on the show, too. Well, he's back. We're like, he broke his promise not to come back. No, he said, I won't come back if you just do the basic thing. Now, Lord Monckton's been involved in the founding of UKIP as well. Its ideas are spreading. And I got to really give it to England. This isn't some butt-kissing scenario. It's true that it's the progenitor, just as it was the progenitor of 1776, as I spoke to 4,000 people 4 years ago at Bilderberg, above the palatial manor where they were meeting. I said, 1776 belongs to you, the people of the UK. That's where it all came from. Massive support. It's the same thing. Again, the UK leading the way, now in the US, now in France. You could say Russia led the way even more, breaking with the globalists, but they did it in their own nationalistic way. It's just a magic time to be alive. So I want to speak big picture with Lord Monckton and where he sees this going, how he thinks they're going to counter-strike. But I got to tell you, I've been in some movies. I've been at the biggest Hollywood parties. I haven't been to Hollywood in 5-6 years because you can't get me there anymore. It's so boring. There's nothing there. I don't get stars in my eyes, butterflies, none of it. I could care less. But when I talk to people like Lord Monckton, who is the quiet voice in the wilderness 20-something years ago exposing global warming as a fraud, all proven in triplicate, and people like Nigel Farage, like a George Washington of the UK, and Ron Pauls, and President Trump, he doesn't pat me on the head. He calls up and says, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? It shows that the return of common sense and decency is here, and all the people that wanted to sabotage the West, who was only trying to build up the world, their day, I think, has pretty much come. But like Hitler in the bunker, they're not giving up. So what do? They want to arrest us. As Lord Monckton's pointed out, a lot of these are foreign nationals like Soros and people openly funding movements to burn down cities, kill cops. I'm not an authoritarian. I'm a super liberal. It's my problem. But at a certain point, they're trying to overthrow our fundamental system That's sedition. Now, he might correct me if he thinks I'm wrong under common law, but Lord Monckton, thank you for joining us. That's a large pallet I've thrown out there, but greetings and salutations.
What a wonderful moment to be alive as we see, first of all, Brexit, and then the Trump double whammy, and the left just don't know what hit them. I was at King's College, Cambridge, which is a communist college at an increasingly communist university, my old alma mater. And at King's College, Cambridge, there were 100 undergraduates in the Politics Society, and we had a debate. And I was on the side of Mr. Trump, and the other 4 speakers were not. That is the kind of balanced debate at Cambridge these days, 4 against 1. And I said to them, right, how many of you would have voted for Brexit if you could, or did vote for Brexit? And I predicted that less than 10% of them would. In fact, it was 5. So I said, all right, how many of you think that spending on defense should be increased to reverse the enormous and dangerous cuts of previous decades? And I predicted less than 5% would agree to that. It was 3. So I said, all right, how many of you think that immigration ought to be more rigorously controlled? I predicted 5%, 2%. And how many of you, I said, think that climate change has been just that little bit exaggerated? 1%, I predicted 5 again. So what we're looking at here is an ideological monoculture, a hive mind of the left, where they all think the same about every major bone of political contention. And they have this robotic uniformity of view. And I said to them, why is it that you are so predictable? Why is it that you don't see any point to Trump and to Brexit and to this movement where ordinary people, and these days increasingly it's working people.
That's right. They don't even respond to giant total defeats. They don't even respond to giant crushing defeats. They're just totally delusional.
Well, this of course is very evident in the measures you see being proposed by the left to make sure that Trump doesn't actually become president. They've been nobbling the members of the Electoral College, trying to get them to change their votes away from what the Constitution would expect them to do. And that, I think, will fail. I think he has a large enough majority there that even though there'll be a few wobblers, he'll still carry the day very clearly. I think it's towards the end of December they do that. And that was their first thing. The next thing, as you were mentioning just a moment ago, they turn out on the streets and start throwing things, and they start rioting because they can't accept the will of the people in a democratic system if the will of the people doesn't happen to agree with them. And look how remarkable it was. After all the advantages were with Hillary Clinton. She outspent Trump approximately 2 to 1. She had virtually every mainstream, or as I call it, Marxstream news medium on her side. She had all that going for her. She had all the young people, all the universities. She had all the blacks and Hispanics, who, of course, are becoming more and more numerous as immigration fails to be controlled properly. For all these reasons, she should, by any analysis, have won this and won it hands down.
But as you're saying, blacks and Hispanics voted for Trump in record numbers.
They did indeed. And this I think, shows a very welcome change in the Hispanic. I've been watching this for some time. They are much more entrepreneurial and free market minded than the blacks are. Let's be clear about it. They do see things differently, and a very large proportion of them did vote for Trump, whereas the blacks were pretty solidly for Clinton. And I think this does show an interesting change in demographic, and one of the things that Grand Old Party is going to have to do is to try to find a way to talk to the blacks as well. It's already done the Hispanics, largely through people like Ted Cruz, of course, but now it needs to do the same for the black vote, so as to cut off all the major areas of support that the so-called Democrats once had. I think they are crumbling. And the reason why they're crumbling is that they are, in particular, they've lost their connection with the working classes.
And they're nasty bastards.
Party has here.
And they're nasty bastards.
Well, of course, that goes without saying. But what is fascinating is that they've thrown away the one priceless advantage they had, which is that working people used to vote left, and they don't anymore.
Sure, let me interject this. Stephen Bannon.
Nigel Farage did was to attract voters from the working classes, particularly in the north of England. He's saying, look, what have the left ever actually done for you? What has the European Union done for you? Look about you. It hasn't changed anything very much. So for heaven's sake, vote UKIP, and then we'll get rid of the EU, and that leaves a lot more money for our government to spend in areas in the north.
And that's my next question.
And the EU would ever help. Yeah, go on.
That's my next question. Clearly, when you have WikiLeaks coming out, clearly when you see how truly nasty these hundreds of thousands of emails are, like, you'd have to work, even if you were a demon, to write this nasty and this hateful, but it shows it's really a college of scumbags that have bad will, and they're just manipulating people. And it was Stephen Bannon's plan to actually cut taxes on the poor people, regardless of what color they are, and deliver a program where Trump's going to go into the black areas. He's going to do tax incentives. He's going to do the tax cuts and deliver and try to break the will and the future takeover of the Marxist Democratic Party. And I see it happening. I mean, I see total victory if Trump presses and does not back down. And I think he absolutely must appoint an attorney general, which he's doing, that will prosecute the Clintons. It's not vindictiveness. It's not authoritarian, they say, if we want them prosecuted. They've committed massive crimes. They must be prosecuted.
I think that the first thing is, let's start with Steve Bannon, whom you mentioned there. I met him when I was last in the States, sort of 6 or 9 months ago. I was very impressed with him and was very glad when I had had some warning this was going to happen, but he eventually ended up pretty much masterminding Trump's campaign. And as a reward for having succeeded in that, he's now his chief strategist. Now, of course, what you do have to worry about, and this is something that Ron Reagan got wrong. I was talking to the chairman of his Council of Economic Advisors a few years ago, and he said, wasn't it a wonderful era? I said, yes, except for one thing. And he said, what? I said, Ron Reagan reduced taxes, but he didn't reduce the spending of the federal government as well. And you have to do both. Both. You cannot do the one without the other, or you will increase what is already a desperately serious problem, both sides of the Atlantic, and we've got to be very clear about this. It was the one sensible thing that any of the lefties on that panel at King's College said. One of the lecturers who was on their side, he said the biggest crisis that's coming is a crisis of over-borrowing by governments. I was amazed that a left-winger was now willing to say this.
Sure, and how close is that crisis? I mean, how close is that crisis?
Very difficult to say when it's going to happen. What we can say is that it will happen. There's now no way out. And if you look back in history, no country as heavily indebted as the United States or the United Kingdom as a percentage of GDP has ever recovered its position.
Exactly. So how do we recover if it's never been done? I mean, Mexico defaulted once, that was over.
It's never been done without violent revolution.
That's right, without a war.
And what is going to happen now is a test of the strength of our national cohesiveness, strength of our institutions, as to whether we can buck the trend and deal with this debt problem without adding to it, as Ron Reagan added massively to it. And Margaret Thatcher began by adding massively to it simply because the previous government had made spending commitments that it took us time to undo. When we did undo them, we, for the first time in 200 years, started paying back the national debt. And there was virtually no political opposition to this. If you do it right, it's one of the things I very quietly did while I was in Downing Street. It was so that we were making these massive cuts and people didn't even miss the fact that we were no longer spending things. And that's the trick. If you're going to cut taxes, as we did under Margaret Thatcher, you must also cut the spending of the federal government. And this is where I slightly worry that Trump is saying we can do it all from the supply side. We can just allow lots of money into the economy and hope that everything takes off and then the greater tax revenues will bail us out. That has never worked. It never will work. You can buck many trends, as he has, but you can't buck that one.
Sure, well, the word is he's going to try to hold it the same. What about holding the same?
Going to have to follow.
What about holding the same, then?
Well, if he held spending the same as it is now, America is just going to go under, because Obama has damn near tripled the national debt in the US, and it took 100 years to accumulate. So very, very serious economic mismanagement, fiscal mismanagement by the Obama regime.
And that's on purpose. Let me add this then, because clearly...
Well, it probably is, but let me be very clear about this. The responsibility of Mr. Trump now is to say that because Mr. Obama was reckless and feckless with the economy and with the Treasury, now there's going to have to be a tightening, and the tightening is going to have to come in the federal government in Washington, D.C. Let me give you one really useful figure. 93% of the voters in Washington, D.C. voted for Clinton. Only 4% voted for Trump. Well, now it's payback time, and it's payback time not for the sake of vengeance, but for the sake of balancing the books. What he's got to do is to cut the federal administration to ribbons. How is he going to pay for these tax cuts that he wants to make? Apart from just not employing so many bureaucrats, the other thing he can do is, let us have a look, about 30% of the land area of the United States is federal-owned lands. Now, my copy of the Constitution says that apart from 10 square miles in the District of Columbia, and apart from a few properties on which forts and ports might be constructed, the federal government has no constitutional right to own land at all. Now, what Mr. Trump should do is sell it off. Sell it off big time in a series of phased sales to put the land back in the hands of the people and the money back in the Treasury to pay off the massive debt that Obama ran up. And the Democrats won't be able to resist this. They'll want to, but they can't. This will be the biggest denationalization in the history of the world. If you defederalize the land and don't let it go back to the states, let it go back to private individuals and corporations.
It'll create the biggest boom ever.
It'd be an enormous boom. I mean, the amount of money you'd raise would be colossal. You would break the power of the federal government. And then you've got to also be very drastic in dealing with bodies like the EPA. Now, under the Interstate Commerce Clause, again in the Constitution, there should be no EPA. The EPA is a constitutional abortion. It shouldn't exist.
Let me stop you there. Let me stop you there.
The EPA does that ought to be done. For instance, they should be monitoring pollution and so on, but that should not be done federally. It should be done at state level, and the EPA should be shut down. And if you start shutting down these duplicating federal agencies that are against your Constitution, are riddled with leftists, and are very expensive, and the EPA is doing its damnedest to close America down, well, close the EPA down, and America can be open for business once again.
That's right, and Lord Monckton joins us from England via Skype. It duplexes. He can't hear me a lot when I talk, so that's why it sounds like we're talking over each other, but just interjecting here about the epic moment we've reached. I just want to get your view on the fact that yourself, Nigel Farage, who came and coached Trump the last few debates, Trump admitted really helped him, you know, go after the nationalism, the anti-globalism, Americanism, not globalism. Just, I mean, we should take stock of how big our victory's been. Globalism is in crisis, and then really understand they want a consolidated economy where the tax-exempt corporations can thrive. It's a new form of feudalism, and then everybody else implodes. I mean, I think really we have to just get to the point of exposing the fact that this is a criminal consolidation conspiracy.
Let me stop you just there, because what you've just mentioned, in fact, is fascism, where a few favored corporations are allowed to get very rich and everybody else is paying through the nose for it. That is fascism. And that, of course, is one aspect of the current so-called Democrat Party. The other aspect, of course, is outright communism. And these two forms of leftism are different sides of the same coin. And the remarkable thing is that the electorate has, to an astonishing degree, rejected these 20th century outdated, failed, and murderous...
And the rejection is accelerating.
When you think that fascism and communism in the 20th century killed 250 million people between them, and that already we're now killing another 6 to 10 million every year by policies to make climate change go away when it's hardly happening anyway. And those policies are killing 6 to 10 million people a year by denying them the right to have electricity that we can take for granted. So the left are continuing their war on humanity. And I think humanity is beginning to wake up to this. And one of the reasons, what you were talking about, the sheer nastiness of the left, one of the reasons why the left are now in such retreat is that people can see that they are nihilistic, they are destructive, they are killing people by the tens of millions. Now there are no longer jackboots marching in the streets, they're no longer open annexation of foreign countries. What you get instead is this insidious new globalized policymaking, which you see at the Marrakesh conference, ludicrously, where Mark Morano, because he dared to
We'll talk about that when we come back, how they're going to counterstrike. Lord Monckton, we got to go to break. Stay with us. We'll be back. Infowars.com. It's Black Friday week, a chance to get amazing, one-of-a-kind, game-changing products that also support our fight against the New World Order at 360 Win. At InfoWarsStore.com or InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139. And again, thank you for funding the true tip of the spear and the fight for human liberty. We could not have done it without you, and I want to salute you for your support, your prayers, the action you've taken. Every race, color, and creed, we are all red-blooded humans together, and I love you.